Welcome back to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. Find out more about us at tertiumquids.org. We also keep a YouTube channel if you can find it, and we haven't been deplatformed yet. Search Freedom and Prosperity Radio on YouTube. Our next guest wants to take us further into this rabbit hole of tech and privacy. She is Rosalind Layton, co-creator of ChinaTechThreat.com, member of the Trump transition team, and visiting scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. Rosalind, thank you so much for joining us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. How are you doing?
It's great to be with you. Thank you.
So talk to us about TikTok. I see the ads. I see them on many online apps, especially smartphone apps seem to be overrun with ads for TikTok with girls and boys making videos of themselves. What is going on here? And am I right to just be offhand suspicious of stuff like this?
Well, we know there's a lot of cool apps that you can download to your phone and you can have a lot of fun. And obviously, youngsters, young people like to try out these apps. And, in general, that's a great thing. It's how we kind of move a lot of different technological applications forward. The concern I have, and a lot of the people using this app don't realize, is that it is owned by a company in China associated with the Chinese government and military. And what is sort of coming to light and we have to grapple with is that China has the second largest military in the world, and they are being very smart about how they conduct their strategy through economic means. They're not, necessarily sending a missile our way, but they're conducting a form of low-grade trench warfare. So they get us to buy their products, they build them with back doors, and they can amass through the TikTok app a gigantic database of personal information, facial recognition. And if you have any idea what the surveillance state that's up and running in China today, it knows where everyone is at all times. It can recognize protesters in the crowd. It knows what everyone's doing. So they can be able to use the TikTok app for people using it for fun. And actually, it turns out a lot of young military people use it, to keep in touch with their friends. But this is part of their military espionage strategy, is to try to identify different people as they're, going about their way. And so that's kind of the concern with TikTok app. Again, very innocuous on the surface, but kind of a nefarious capabilities on the back end.
Is it appropriate to remind people that all of this that we see, and I keep saying culminate with the hope that someday it will culminate, this whole Mueller investigation, Russian collusion, et cetera, started with the esteemed former chief of staff of the White House, John Podesta, either clicking on one of those, hey, you should see what Alice from the Brady Bunch looks like now ads, or downloading one of these games and finding himself in the new kind of Russian troller, which are these phishing expeditions and collecting data, and all of a sudden they had all of his emails. I mean, this is huge privacy concerns overseas, and that we seemingly are willing to just open up our computers and our smartphones to this sort of intrusion.
Right. Well, I mean, it's kind of, our adversaries know how to prey upon the strengths of Americans. We're open-minded people. We like to share. We're social. There is a similar app made in Russia called Face App, which has a kind of similar facial recognition capability. That could be married with different Russian misinformation techniques. But what I think when you mention the Mueller investigation, what is most concerning to me is that we have major threats with countries that don't like us, that want to hurt us, and we spend a lot of our time doing fake policy. And essentially for 30 years, we ignored what was going on in China. We built, they were stealing our stuff, infiltrating our economy in various ways. And basically the lawmakers were out to lunch.
Right.
And finally, we're in a situation where we have a president who's willing to say, the buck stops here. We're not going to do this anymore. And he has a strategy where he's calling out the biggest violators, large companies like Huawei, which make the network equipment, and he's put them on notice. So I think what your listeners need to know is when we think about security and privacy, it's not just saying, well, this one company, we're going to single them out and everything's going to be safe and great.
Right.
And it's all fine. We have to understand that our adversaries will use whatever means necessary to get in the door. So whether it's the equipment, whether it's a device, like it could be a Lenovo laptop, that is the largest maker of laptops, another Chinese company. It could be the TikTok app, an app you use on your phone. There's any number of ways that the Chinese government, working through companies, could be able to surveil you. They can get their way into, any number of enterprises where they want to steal stuff, sabotage, hack the electric grid, whatever it may be. There's 100,000 hackers employed by the Chinese government to do this. So we have to just be more vigilant, and I'm pleased at least that we have a government that recognizes it.
You mentioned,
but there's a long way to go.
You mentioned Huawei, the equipment manufacturer. I've had more than enough of my tech friends turn around and say, but 5G, and are we selling ourselves down a river of convenience that 5G and autonomous cars are worth giving China access to all of our technological equipment and communications networks?
No. So what you need to tell your friends is that the essential patents for 5G are still made in the USA. It's essentially Qualcomm. Mm-hmm. They make the stuff that makes 5G work. What Huawei makes are the applying the essential patents. So basically one Qualcomm patent is equal to 1,000 Chinese patents. So our nation still makes the relevant stuff, and that's why putting China on the entity list, as the Trump administration has done. So that means Qualcomm cannot license its patents to Huawei, and that's a good thing. And we've already seen the effects because the Huawei phones they cannot call them 5G phones because they do not have the chip inside the phone that allows it to be a 5G phone. Now, it doesn't mean they may try to figure out their own way to do it. They want to make 6G or what have you, but at least for the short run, that was extremely important that we don't sell or license our essential intellectual property to the Chinese, to Huawei or other Chinese enterprises.
I was at the Consumer Electronics Show where Verizon, Qualcomm, and I'm trying to remember the third company that came out. I think it was actually a Chinese company, went up on stage and started talking about 5G. And the Qualcomm guy made it a point, and the Verizon guy backed it up and said, this is really not consumer tech as much as it is for autonomous vehicles and distance medical. And I'm thinking, again, more reason not to give the Chinese control over our autonomous vehicles. Jerry, it's great. My Uber is driving me. Oh, hold it. Where's my Uber taking me? What's happening here?
Right. But you're right about 5G is really about the industrial applications, the Internet of Things. It's about connecting everything to the Internet. And certainly I think Verizon deserves a lot of credit because they recognize the threat of Huawei years ago. They said, we have a clean network. We're not having Huawei phones on it. We don't have Huawei equipment, and that's that. And they did that without the government telling them what to do. They just knew that it was not a good idea, and they made a policy quite a long time before this ever became a thing. And they were just on the right side of their customers and certainly of their business because they also don't want to give their business away either. So there's certainly forward-thinking companies in that way, but consumers, we have to step up our vigilance and what we know. Mm-hmm. Other company CEOs have to do more. Congress has to do more. It's not just about one part of government. We need the whole of government, the whole of our society. We've got to take this seriously.
Rosalind Layton is the co-creator of ChinaTechThreat.com, a member of the Trump transition team at the FCC, and I appreciate all the reforms that Ajit Pai has been great as a chair for almost everything that's come down from the FCC. But let me ask you, within the governmental bramble bush, we were just talking about this in the earlier segment with Justin Danhoff from the National Center, is this ease of operations where the government, especially NSA, Homeland Security, FBI, can, instead of having to get a warrant to search Joe Thomas or Rosalind Layton's home, they can search the Facebook accounts. And by having an agreement with Facebook or Google, they can ostensibly search you without having to get the warrants. opening this then up to China, beyond that, I worry about things like you mentioned facial recognition, but even then deep fakes, the ability to make it look like I'm doing something that I didn't do or was someplace that I wasn't. Maybe I'm just getting in touch with my inner Alex Jones, but this is starting to make me a little concerned about the whole Bill of Rights.
Right. Well, listen, I share your concern. And, well, first of all, let me say I'm glad you were pleased with the FCC and Ajit Pai, and that I think they do an excellent job. And he stared death in the face with all the things he's had to overcome. A remarkable, wonderful, courageous leader. So, but in terms of what you're saying, how, the U.S. government working with the American tech companies. So one of the things I think you need to know is the United States was really the first country in the world to adopt an information privacy law for the government's use of information. And it goes back to before the founding of our country. Our privacy laws and information laws have always been about protecting people from the administrative state. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something Americans should know. They should get up to speed on trying to know that we have a legal tradition for protecting the privacy, the sort of the sovereignty of our private lives and individual lives. At the same time, I think it's important that we need to understand as our economy has evolved that we can't, let's say, isolate our tech companies. We have to work with them. There's been obviously a lot of questions, but in our world, we have a lot of threats that we didn't have in the past in the way that technology is used. So what I would say is it's better that we find a way to work with them. It has to follow we have strict laws about how the government can use information, and those are they are always being tested in the courts. They are frequently strengthening the individual rights and related. But what I'd say is, if we just try to pretend that this doesn't exist, you will get the Chinese will figure out a way to do it, and they have a surveillance state. So that's another reason why we don't want to have these kind of products in our economy. We don't want the Lenovo laptop or the TikTok app or the Huawei network equipment, because they don't care about our laws and our Bill of Rights and so forth. So at least when they are American companies, we have the rule of law. Facebook just got a $5 billion fine.
I saw that.
They're going to be under very strict scrutiny going forward. So the American companies are assets, and this is it's something that we should use to strengthen the United States, not destroy those companies because we don't look at them seriously.
Well, and I think it's fair to that. It's something I've discussed with constitutional law enforcement in the past, is the admissibility of something. We debated this about surveillance cameras on our downtown mall. I said, well, if you show me how regulated the admissibility of a frozen moment is, then I can feel a little better about it. But if somebody's just going to go into court and say, hey, I've got a picture of Joe Thomas standing next to this guy, I want a warrant to search everything Joe owns, I find that to be where I want our justice system strictly saying, hold it, you can't just come in here with one photograph and say this is enough to start a RICO case or anything like that on it. Rosalind, what about China and their corporatist economy, where the Chinese government is the majority partner of all their, quote, private companies, and therefore access to all of our proprietary technology? How do we fight back on that? And has the Trump administration done a good job? And what could they be doing more of?
Right. Well, that's a great question. And I think it's something that Americans, many people assume that, it's a capitalist economy, so that somehow that they are running with the same rules and procedures that we do, but they do not. I mean, if you want to put your company on the American Stock Exchange, you need to make disclosures. You have auditors. You have to, you have a whole variety of transparency requirements you have to fulfill. That's not so in the case of these Chinese enterprises. They have boards of directors where military officials and government officials sit on them. They get preferential financing from state banks. They receive hacked information that the government gets for them, which they can use for their business. So it's obviously not fair play, and we need to deal with it in a number of ways. One is through the World Trade Organization, where we take China to court in the world courts. That's one area. But what I would also say is that many people are calling for a split, that we basically stop doing business with a country with whom we can't trust. Now, for some, they may see that's extreme. I know that there's a lot of farmers and other groups who want to sell their stuff in China, but I think that the most important thing is we need to have much more critical view about what is the real cost of doing business with this country. I think that the Trump administration's on the right track. It has got the people working there, Ambassador Lighthizer and so forth. These were the ones who were saying China should not be admitted to the World Trade Organization. They were critical of this decades ago when nobody would pay them any attention. Washington just ignored it. And finally, they're in the place to, they have been the critical folks. So the negotiations are ongoing. They are difficult. They take a long time. But what we do have are the sort of things in place now that can empower the various branches, the Department of Commerce, the various defense, different cabinets that can scrutinize the companies that are the true national security threats and identify them. There's already 50 companies that have been identified as threats since 2017. I know there's at least another 50 that should be on there, and those are the kinds of activities that have to take place. Speaking of video cameras, for example, those are being ripped out. A lot of them are made by Chinese companies that are security risks, so those video cameras are having to be removed now. Mm-hmm. And then find a suitable replacement.
Right. Well, let me finish up on this one. Rosalind Layton of the ChinaTechThreat.com. Is it fair for our listeners then to go out and understand that just because something is the cheapest, you mentioned Lenovo laptops, they tend to be at the top of the list when you search under for best prices for laptops, that kind of thing, or the easiest, the axiom: if something is free, if computer software is free, you are the product. But it even takes a darker, more sinister thing if it's Chinese built.
Right. Well, this is where I think, again, we have in our American sort of DNA, we like things that are good value. We like to look for good prices, but where we've been tricked is we think that just because it's cheap, then we've had this idea, just get stuff on the cheap. There's a high cost to that, and security is worth paying for. And I definitely think the consumers need more help. We may need to put disclosures onto certain products. This is a security risk if you use this product. Okay. It's absolutely true. There's not one place people can go and find out, well, what can I buy that's going to be a safe product for me? What can I trust? And we should be able to find a place that helps consumers make those decisions. I'm trying to do that on China Tech Threat, where we're identifying, as you said, the Lenovo laptops and whatnot, where we make it more transparent. Where are the things that are risks?
And we appreciate it.
I think another area where the government can help to be able to say, these are things that are not, we can't certify that that you're going to be safe if you use this product.
Well, thank you, Rosalind Layton of ChinaTechThreat.com. Everyone go there and take a look around there. And you use the best phrase, though. It's not about inexpensive. It's about best value. And sometimes just because something's cheap doesn't make it the best value. And I truly appreciate that of all of our conversation. Thank you so much for joining us this week.
My pleasure. Have a great day.
And thank you for joining us this weekend again from the 400th commemoration of the beginning of the General Assembly next week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Until then, for all of us here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, so long and thanks for all the fish.